Yeah, a very good evening to all of you enthusiastic surgeons who are interested in looking at the thyroid surgery that is going to be shown today. And the topic I'll introduce first, and it's a very interesting topic and uh, something which is close to my heart. Now, for any budding surgeon or surgeon doing general surgery or doing or just finished ENT surgery, head and neck surgeon, so thyroidectomy is like a bread and butter surgery. But okay, though I mean, it appears to be a simple surgery. The enigma behind doing the surgery is, I mean, it's really enigmatic, and you have to be very precise in your dissection. You have to identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve, the parathyroids, and definitely preserve them. And identifying the parathyroids is a very significant task. It has a big learning curve, if you realize. That is the reason we all get hemithyroidectomies at the beginning of our practice and only total thyroidectomy after a few years after doing a lot of thyroid surgeries. That is because preserving the parathyroids is difficult, and preserving the parathyroids is a sign of a good master. So the present day imaging that we have and the entire topic that is today is mainly focused on fluorescence guided surgery, surgery for the thyroid, and it helps really well in preserving the parathyroids. And preservation of parathyroids is so important because it's a permanent dysfunction for the patient. Um, you cannot reverse this parathyroidism. It's very difficult to hypoparathyroidism. It's very difficult to treat also. So apart from the focus, the main focus, which is on preserving the parathyroids by the use of fluorescence guidance, the secondary focus will be on performing an endoscopic thyroidectomy, either through the standard endoscopic procedure or what is more becoming more and more popular, that is a robotic assisted thyroidectomy. And for doing this endoscopic and robotic thyroidectomies, we have many standard approaches. I mean, different surgeons based on their training employ different approaches, like the transoral approach through the vestibule, lateral neck approach. There's the transaxillary approach. There's the bilateral transaxillary approach for doing a total thyroidectomy, and there is a combined breast and axillary approach. So today's speaker, Dr. Nayak, is one of the uh, pioneers of this rabbit procedure, which is the robotic assisted breast insufflation thyroidectomy. And I would like I'm looking very forward to this talk on endoscopic and robotic thyroidectomy with the focus on fluorescence guided surgery in thyroidectomy. So now I'll introduce the speaker. Dr. Sandeep Nayak is a very well-known name in the surgical oncology circles of the country, and he is based at Bangalore, and he is the director of surgical oncology at Fortis Cancer Institute, Bannerghatta, Bangalore. And he received his training from Chittaranjan Cancer Institute, Kolkata, and subsequently has been a assistant professor and faculty at Kidwai Memorial Institute, Bangalore, and then he's been a consultant at Fortis for the past 3 years. He has done a specialized fellowship at Galaxy Hospital, Pune, and he also has a MRCS to his name. So this is Rabbit is one of the specialized technique which he technique which he specializes in. And without much ado, I request Dr. Sandeep Nayak to give his talk. Over to Dr. Nayak.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Karthik. It was a nice introduction about the topic as well as me. So, it's a very interesting topic and a very, very narrow and very specialized topic. So, I had to go through myself a lot of, details about the technique and the technology that is available to understand it and to present so that, people who are listening to this topic today are also helped in the to understand it and use it in a better way. So is the vision clear? Because I thought, someday from the technical team there was some complaint about the quality. Some Vasavi, is it clear?
Yes, sir. There is one black box in the right corner, top right corner of your screen.
Top right
There,
corner, I am
yeah, here. Yeah, the cursor
video.
is there.
So
yeah.
Getting transmitted, is it?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Close that video. Okay, I'll just close that video then.
Okay.
Hide the video panel. Now it's okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, fine. So, so my sincere thanks to Stryker for organizing this talk. So in fact, the fluorescence imaging is coming in a big way as far as all the surgeries are concerned. It is something which is emerging, a very easy technology to use and a very cheap technology, because the recurring expenditure on this is really minimal. So something which I took interest a few years back and started using it, both, in all the forums, like, open, laparoscopic, as well as in robotic, this technology is available today. Now, what is the entire talk or the learning objective of this today's presentation will be to understand the challenges in thyroid surgery, how to improve the results using technology, the presently available technology, and the future perspectives. How do we see this going ahead? Is it going to be there? Is it going to vanish? What is going to happen? So that will be our learning objectives today. So what are the scenarios in the thyroid surgery that we are going to discuss and we are going to understand today? One is hemithyroidectomy, other one is total thyroidectomy, and the third is the central compartment dissection. Now, when it's an hemi, the risks are really minimal. In fact, even if you remove parathyroid gland, even if one single parathyroid gland is there in the body, that gland is going to take care of the calcium metabolism in the body. So, in hemithyroidectomy, the biggest risk is only the recurrent laryngeal nerve. The parathyroid glands, even if they are removed, it's fairly acceptable. But it is important that we practice saving the gland in hemithyroidectomy itself, because we don't know what is going to happen to the opposite gland over time. So nobody will remember whether the parathyroid has been saved or not. Tomorrow, when you're doing completion thyroidectomy, you may end up with the removal of that parathyroid as well. Coming to the total thyroidectomy, of course, both the recurrent laryngeal nerves and all the parathyroid glands are at risk. And this is a segment where we have to be very careful, because this is a segment of surgery. This surgery is one of the common surgeries done by everybody. When it comes to central compartment dissection, of course, the glands are at a very high risk. Most of the times, we end up implanting the parathyroid gland somewhere else, so that the function of the gland is carried on. Now, what are the key problems with thyroidectomy? Very often when the patient comes to me, the only question or the fear factor which I see in them is that they lose their voice. But it's actually a strange fear, because I have to tell them, in fact, that is one of the least concerns that I have. If you look at the statistics, the bilateral recurrent laryngeal nerve where aphonia occurs is only in 0.4% of the people of total thyroidectomies. 0.4, when you compare it to the permanent hypocalcemia, is I think, less than, hypocalcemia is about 20 times more than that. In fact, it's some risk which is so significantly higher that, in fact, recurrent laryngeal nerve injury, in fact, I usually tell them that it is the least of the possible complications in the list which we do. So, in fact, the most important thing that we should be worried about is causing a permanent hypocalcemia. Permanent hypocalcemia is so dangerous. I remember during my training years, one of the patients who had recurrent hypocalcemic attacks, which required IV calcium repeatedly. Finally, I remember that lady committed suicide because of permanent hypocalcemia. So it is such a serious matter, and we need to be cautious about this one organ when we are doing thyroidectomies. Temporary hypocalcemias are very, very common. 46% is the incidence, and 46%, in fact, these ones will recover eventually, maybe in 3 weeks' time. In fact, I've seen some patients recovering in 3 months' time, sometimes rare, but 3 weeks is what we say usually, full recovery by 3 weeks' time. The rest of the complications are extremely rare. We don't usually come across them. So when, in fact, I'll just add one more thing over here. The hypocalcemic episode which we see is usually after 48 hours of thyroidectomy, not immediate. So if you check calcium level next day, it will be normal. It is always after 48 hours that you have to check the calcium. Now, can we do something else? In fact, now presently what I've started doing is I simply do a parathormone level the next day morning to check how is the function. If generally, if it is above 15, I don't even bother about keeping the patient in the hospital. The same day patient gets discharged. If the parathormone levels are below 15, then we consider a temporary hypocalcemia, and then treat the patient accordingly, and we repeat the parathormone levels after a week or so. We are testing this protocol. We have done a good number of cases. We'll come out with our data on this very soon. Now, how does one recognize or identify the parathyroid gland? It's very tricky, because when you look at it, it is till date, it has been only the surgeon's visual evaluation that has identified the parathyroid gland properly. And one of the descriptions of how does a parathyroid gland look has been described very well by some surgeon, who said it looks like the tongue of a jaundiced hummingbird. Those of you who know, you have seen hummingbird, it is the smallest bird that is there in the world. It's tiny. Imagine the tongue of it, which basically describes you the difficulty in identifying it. It is not easy. Even for trained eyes, it is very difficult. So the question comes as to, can we make it better? So how can we do it? There are two aspects of it. One, a better vision and better differentiation. So, but let us understand more about the anatomy of the parathyroid gland. When you look at the superior parathyroid, which is the most stable one of the two parathyroids, superior and inferior, when I talk about two. So if you look at it, the most common position of it, about 50%, is somewhere around the tubercle of Zuckerkandl. And another good number is deep to the thyroid gland. This is the location, just medial to the thyroid gland. So only a few of them are away from it. So this is a more constant gland to look at. Now, when it comes to inferior parathyroid, it is much more volatile position. It's never in constant position. The superficial location, which is this one, position number 4, which is superficial to the thyroid gland, is quite common. In fact, it is about 40% on left as well as right side. And when you look at the next common position, it comes closer to the tubercle of Zuckerkandl. So both superior and inferior glands can be very close to each other in this location. And the rest of the positions are also very common. In fact, very often it is said that whenever you don't locate any parathyroid gland and still the patient is not hypocalcemic, probably the gland is sitting inside the mediastinum. So just imagine the various positions which are possible for parathyroid, both superior and inferior, and this adds to your problem when you're performing the surgery, because anything that you see which is yellowish and brownish yellow could be parathyroid. You never know. So added to it is you have to save the recurrent laryngeal nerve. The relationship of recurrent laryngeal nerve to the gland, of course, has been described by many, but again, that is not a constant position. You saw the anatomy. That's a very good paper which has been it's an anatomical paper which has been published, and it shows how the positions of parathyroid gland can change so significantly. Yes, the recurrent laryngeal nerve needs to be saved. It goes deeper here in the tracheoesophageal groove. There is a triangle described over here, base triangle. This triangle, of course, many of us may not be using this, but when we are doing a robotic surgery, because we are slightly lateral, not absolutely midline, and more so when we are doing a BABA approach for a thyroidectomy, we see this triangle quite often, or rather we see this always, because this is a triangle which guides us into identifying structures. So what is important, I already spoke to you. The core of discussion today is improving outcomes, and we are looking at the image quality as one aspect, and the differentiation between the tissues as a second aspect. Now, image quality has two very important aspects to it. One is the magnification, and second one is the resolution of the image. Of course, the 3D image also adds to it, and very often I think the 4K and 3D go parallel to each other. In fact, the resolution itself in the 4K will compensate for the 3D image. Till date, we don't have a 4K 3D. The day it comes, probably I have to change my opinion. So what is the importance of magnification? This is 1x image. We are looking at this image and we can hardly spot the bird sitting over here. So when you're looking at a parathyroid sitting like this, your likelihood of or chance of identifying it correct is quite dismal. Maybe it's possible, but it is low. So we can use a loop. Loops are usually 2.5 x. That's what is comfortable for us when we're doing thyroid and all, and that will give us a magnification, and we could be able to identify it better. But when we look at minimal access surgery, robotic or using the standard laparoscopic equipment, here we are not looking at the digital zoom, but your scope can go so close to the organ. Your magnification is actually unlimited. You can go very close to the organ and see. Of course, your digital zoom itself is limited. You can go maybe in robotic, maybe 15, and laparoscopic also, maybe up to 15x. But the magnification that you get when you go closer to the object and it is not digital, you are really going close to the object, and that gives you an advantage of magnification. So when we do minimal access, in my way of doing, I use either a BABA technique for endoscopic thyroidectomy, or I use Rabbit, which is my own technique. So I'll just show you a video of endoscopic thyroid surgery. I'll have to get out of this presentation. So you can see this.
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Okay, good. So let me see whether I optimized the image. Yes, I optimized it. Right. Okay, so these are the port positions for the Baba technique. What I'm going to show you is an hemithyroidectomy. For hemithyroidectomy, I don't use the contralateral port. I use the ipsilateral 3 ports because that is more than sufficient for me. But if you're a beginner, you want an assistant port, you can always use one more port here and create a space in this region. So, this is not our main focus of presentation today, but this is the nodule, and these are the port positions. So I use this as the primary port and tunnel through and reach the neck, and from so we use the monopolar cautery, and the plane is actually below the deep fascia of the neck. This is the sternomastoid muscle which you are seeing, and see the flap is being raised. The flap is deeper to the deep fascia of the neck. This is the bared out sternomastoid muscle. This is the thyroid nodule. Now the approach is from lateral to the sternomastoid. I go in between the 2 heads of sternomastoid, but see the neck is rotated to the opposite side. So the recurrent and everything is actually superficial when you rotate the neck. So these are the strap muscles or ribbon muscles. This omoid. You can see the thyroid popping out over there. This is thyroid. This is a patient with the thyroiditis. So the clarity will be, or there will be a lot of fibrous tissue. This is the inferior parathyroid. Again, this is showing you the visual method. But because there is magnification, you will see it better. You saw the recurrent nerve also over there. I'll show it better. I'll freeze the image and I'll show you. See, this is parathyroid here. This is recurrent. Parathyroid is pushed. This is superior parathyroid. This is the recurrent nerve. This is the thyroid nodule. So nodules in the thyroid also can sometimes confuse you and make you think that it is parathyroid. Again, we are differentiating by color. Remember, when we are doing a surgery without using any other means. This was a pure hemithyroidectomy, so I did not do any vascularity test for the parathyroid. I completed the parathyroid. This is the ligament, Veress ligament. And you have seen the recurrent laryngeal nerve going here. This is the recurrent entering the cricothyroid membrane. Skipping it. So in this particular procedure, I have not used any differentiating technologies. It's only with the magnification. Because we have magnified, we are able to identify the structures. Recurrent is going here, and the parathyroid has been already pushed. I have shown you it's gone behind the inferior parathyroid. So if I have saved one parathyroid with its vascularity, I'm okay with other parathyroid even if it is not saved. So that completes the hemithyroidectomy, and this is the advantage of magnification. Of course, the stability of vision when it comes to minimal invasive is not as good as rabbit procedure, because robotic, the camera is held by the robo, so it makes it much easier. Getting back to the presentation, okay. Right. Okay, so you can see this. Vasavi?
Yes, sir. We can
Okay,
see
because
the
when I
presentation.
change the screen, I need to be told whether it is okay or not. So
Sure,
what is
sure.
the problem with the anatomy of parathyroid? It is the vascularity also which has to be looked at. Parathyroids are supplied by inferior thyroid artery. It is not the superior, because anatomically the origin is like that. So, and this vessel which supplies is very thin. It shoots out just at where the inferior thyroid artery enters the thyroid gland, and it's a very thin artery which runs along the posterior surface of the thyroid gland and enters the superior thyroid as well as the inferior thyroid. It is very easy to damage it. So how do we, after all doing this, how do we confirm that we have saved the functional parathyroid? So that is where the scope of angiography comes, and we need a real-time angiography. We don't want to do it at the lab. So how is this achieved? It is achieved by the fluorescence technology. So what is the concept? It's a concept wherein you shine the light at a frequency in near infrared region. The frequency of light which is shined is also in the infrared region. It is usually laser. You fire it around 750 nanometers, and you look at a reflection from certain substances which are in the nature, naturally occurring substances, to give out that light back to you in a frequency of around 830 nanometers. Now, there are substances in our body itself which transmit that or emit that when you shine light, or you have to give it exogenously. Exogenously, what we give is most commonly indocyanine green. It is a dye. It's a water soluble dye. It's tricarbocyanine dye, which binds with tissue proteins, and in blood when it is given, it binds with albumin, and that is typically it is when a light in the wavelength of 760 to 785 nanometers is shined at it, it gives out light in this range, say 820 to 840. So that light is captured by the camera, specialized camera, and that is shown to the surgeon. So that is the entire concept of fluorescence. So what is the advantage of this dye when you compare it to commonly available other dyes, like you have methylene blue which has been used previously? There are many other dyes which have been used, but the greatest advantage is the serious side effect of this is dismal. It's 0.05%. So you'll hardly come across any complications like reactions and all that. So it's a very safe product to use. The technology I already explained to you. Laser is shined and the image is captured from that. How do you use it clinically? You need to administer 5 milligrams to just around 5 milligrams of indocyanine green. Indocyanine green comes in a 25 milligram vial. You dilute it. Their standard recommendation is 5 ml, but you can add for 10 ml, and about 3 ml of it is injected into the patients by IV. Now, when you do that, you look for the vessels. I'll show you a live video of this. That's when you will understand the beauty of this particular technology. See, this is a post-thyroidectomy. You are seeing the bare thyroid bed over here, and the ICG injection has been given. Now you see slowly the green light coming on. This is the inferior parathyroid on the right side. Now this is the left side. You can see the vessel going into the inferior superior parathyroid here. Inferior parathyroid is somewhere here under this. This is superior parathyroid. You can see the vessel going there, and it is well perfused. This is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Even nerve takes up the time. So that is how clear it gets. We know that the parathyroid has been saved clearly without any confusion. I can send this patient home the next day. But there are times when we see that the the gland's vascularity has not been retained. So what do? We need to implant. This is how we implant. See, what I do is I usually implant it in the sternomastoid. Usually it is implanted in the sternomastoid, but what I do is I implant in the pectoralis major, because we most of the times end up doing minimally invasive surgery, and our access, as I showed you, is from the from the axilla. So that is where we try to save, and we put a clip on top of it. This clip is an identifying marker for us tomorrow if we have any reason to explore this area and find the parathyroid glands. But is there any way we can identify the parathyroid gland before we cause damage? So that is something which has been a quest for many, but actually as of now there is no perfect answer. But I think over time we will get to it. There is a differential imaging which we can get today with using same, the ICG. But just imagine, you are looking for a well-lit parathyroid gland over a well-lit thyroid gland when the position of parathyroid is so uncertain. So this is same, we have given injection at the time of thyroidectomy when the thyroid has been mobilized, and we look for different color of the parathyroid gland compared to the thyroid gland. Extremely difficult. We generally find it very difficult to identify by this technology. So as of now, until we find a better dye or better way of doing it, this is not easy to do. Is there another way? Yes, there is a autofluorescence which has been discovered and described in 2014. In fact, what is autofluorescence? There are naturally occurring fluorophores in the body. In fact, parathyroid gland is one of them. When you shine parathyroid gland with 785 nanometer light, it emits near infrared light at around 820 nanometers. Now this can be captured, and it's a very, very faint light, but it can be captured, enhanced, and a surgical viable image can be produced. This is actually at least 2.5 to 10 times higher than the surrounding tissue, thyroid tissue. And that image could be, if the technology develops well, this could be one of the technologies which we can use to identify parathyroid and be very sure that we have saved it. So the theoretical explanation for this, nobody knows why it happens, but theoretical explanation is that the calcium sensor receptors protein in the parathyroid gland are the ones which produce this light. This is the image. Again, remember, this is a very highly enhanced video. When we are doing it live, it is not this good. In fact, all the lights in the OT should be completely off, and even the windows should be completely closed, and only then you will be able to see some shine like this. It's again, if it is hiding somewhere, if the anatomy is deeper to the thyroid gland, it's very difficult to identify. But yes, there is a technology. This is superior and inferior parathyroid, which is seen here on the right side. And same, I think it has been mobilized, and we have seen on the opposite side as well. But in live, when we do it, it is not as convincing as it should be. So there is a lot to really work on, and it is there are potential false positives as well as potential false negatives, which can make your decision a bit more difficult. Other scenario wherein we get into is the central compartment dissection, where we can end up damaging the nerve as well as the gland. And I'll just show you a short video, which is a robotic video, and I'll show you the importance of this technology. In fact, of course, you have to use both. You need to identify the vessel. If you have shared insulin situ, it becomes mandatory for you to identify the vessel which is going into the parathyroid gland and demonstrate that it is viable. Otherwise, you need to implant, because there are times when you can save the gland, lateralize and save it. But you have to be doubly sure. So I'll show what happened. Yeah, this is the video. See, I'll be running through this. You know what is central compartment dissection. We need to clear all the lymph nodes around the thyroid. Now, this is, yeah. See, I have shown here at least one parathyroid is identified and sent for frozen section, and we implant it. Mind you, with the robotic, our identification rate of parathyroid, and even with the endoscopic, our identification rate of parathyroid gland is nearly 100%, because of the magnification itself. So once the thyroidectomy is complete, I'm showing a rabbit video only here. Thyroidectomy is completed by rabbit. We have heavy lymph nodes in the central compartment. This is the right lymph side central compartment. You are seeing the recurrent laryngeal nerve here. This is the nodal mass. And the nodal mass is gently dissected out. But when we do this, see, before, in these cases where I know the parathyroid cannot be saved with vascularity, I usually remove it and send it for frozen section. How do you send frozen section? It's also very important. It's not the entire gland that goes for frozen section. We take a small bit of the gland, we mince it, we send a small bit of the gland for in saline for frozen section. Once it is confirmed that it is parathyroid, we implant rest of it. You can't send the entire gland for confirmation. And during the procedure, we preserve the parathyroid gland in ice cold saline. We freeze the saline, we break it into when it is ice, we break it, we put it in a tray and we maintain it in that. So it's important that the cold chain is maintained for the parathyroid gland. Otherwise, by the time you finish the surgery, it won't be viable. So the entire, when we do this kind of a surgery, when we are removing all the nodal or tissue in the central compartment, vascularity of the gland, parathyroid gland, is severely affected. We cannot save it, and it is bare. See, the recurrent it is just the bare recurrent which you are seeing here. There is hardly any tissues in the central compartment. This is the right paratracheal area. I'll run through this because, yeah, see, this is the right recurrent. And there is always a lot of tissue behind the recurrent nerve on the right side. So it's very important that we remove all the tissue posterior to the recurrent nerve. And when we do this, I think in maybe about 10% of the patients, we can save the parathyroid gland in situ. Because these are extensive lymph node dissections, especially a patient with extensive nodal disease. It is always wise to simply remove it and implant. So that's the right recurrent laryngeal nerve. And I have already shown you how the gland is implanted at the end of the procedure. I may have a few more slides left. Let me see. Yeah. So what happens when the parathyroid is avulsed along with the central compartment nodes? This is the avulsed parathyroid gland, which is seen by autofluorescence. It is possible to see. So autofluorescence technology, if it is but it has to be absolutely dark. So this is at present more or less theoretical. And what could be the future? In fact, this technology I believe has a great future, because there's a lot of research which is happening. Image guided surgery is coming in a big way. Just imagine tomorrow when you are doing surgery, this is a sciatic nerve in a rat, but a recurrent nerve in human beings is seen in red color, and the parathyroid is seen in green color, and the thyroid is the one which you need to remove. Is there anything better than that for you when you're doing a surgery? So I think in next few years we will be reaching it, because there are many fluorescent materials, pharmaceuticals which are being tried out in surgery, and we will see it happening very soon. So to conclude, fluorescence has a significant advantage when performing surgeries, and especially for low volume surgeons who are beginning their career. Fluorescence would be a thing which will save a lot of face and a lot of patients. Of course, in teaching also it's very useful. So when we demonstrate the vascularity and all that, it is very useful for the learners how to preserve, how to go about the smaller nuances of the surgery. Of course, the technology has a lot of scope to improve, but I believe it will be happening sooner than later. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Karthik.
Yeah. That was a wonderful presentation, sir. And
thank you.
It was, I hope it was a very useful thing for all the attendees. And I actually wish you had shown even more number of videos and spent a bit more time on both the robotic and the endoscopic procedures. But I think the focus was on fluorescence guidance surgery. And before I make my observations, a couple of questions I'll just allude to first. One, do you routinely use fluorescence and autofluorescence in all your thyroid surgeries? I think autofluorescence you already explained because it's mostly theoretical. But what about fluorescence? Do you routinely use in all cases?
See, autofluorescence also has come in the market. It is available, but it's not so common. I think, we are using the Stryker system at present. So we have both open as well as the laparoscopy system, and robotic, of course, Firefly. Now, I tend to use it, though there is no proof of for a lot of these things, But in fact, many of us have started using it, especially for angiography for parathyroid gland, just to see the viability. And mm, uh, we are using it quite commonly. Not, I would not say every time, but very commonly we are using to identify the blood supply, viability of blood supply.
Okay. Another question is, what is the success percentage of reimplantation?
Reimplantation depends on your preservation of the gland. If you preserve it well with frozen or ice cold normal saline, your success rate is at least 80%, what we see. But if your preservation in a long surgery and all, sometimes we have seen failures. Our failures rate is probably around 10 to 15% is what we are seeing in our implanted cases.
Okay. Another question is, how early do you give the ICG dye prior to surgery, or how do you time the ICG? When do you give the ICG? That is probably the question. And the second part of the question is, have you any experience with use of nanoparticles as a contrast medium or as a dye? So yeah.
I didn't. Okay, first question I'll answer, but second question I need more answers.
Okay.
More, I need to understand. I didn't understand it. See, ICG when you're doing it for angiography, it is given at the time of study. It need not be given prior. So at the time when you are, is it my end noise or?
Sorry.
Just a minute. There's some noise. Yeah. So when we see, it depends on the circulation time. So the circulation time for it to reach the target organ is about a minute after it is given. So the anesthetist, we tell the anesthetist to give the dye when we want to assess the vascularity, and within few minutes, 1 minute actually is the time in which it actually reaches. 54 seconds is what is the theoretical time. 38 to 54 seconds is what books describe. But you say it is 1 minute. There's a lot of echo. I don't know whether I am facing it or 1 second. Hold on. I'm not. Yeah.
No, I think the problem was with me.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
So the problem was with me. So I had logged in on the computer also to look at the Q&As simultaneously. So that's the problem. Okay.
Stop the audio. That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So the second part of the question was, do you have any experience with the use of nanoparticles? Nanoparticles as a dye. It's been described in literature. You might be knowing, you might have seen it. So do you have an experience with that? Or
no. See, there are many technologies which are coming into work because of this kind of uses. So fluorescence is one of them. Yes, nanoparticle also. Many things can be used for this purpose. Anything that emits and gives you differentiation can be used, and it's a very vast array of things. At least there are about 40 to 50 materials which are being tested for this purpose. So really, unless it comes into proper clinical use, I don't think we all will be really studying it in detail.
Yeah. So any other questions? From the participants. So there's one more question. Do you feel that endoscopic transoral thyroid surgery at the time of COVID is safe? The transoral technique, is it safe?
No, I don't do transoral. Only few cases which I have done are only for this one, thyroglossal cyst. It's not my preferred method because most of my cases are malignancies. So I don't prefer to do transoral for malignancies because extensive dissection precision is required. So See, in COVID era, everything seems unsafe. So I don't know anybody. Actually, I'm taking a back foot today as far as COVID is concerned, because it seems like, none of us have any knowledge about the disease and everybody wants to talk. So I really don't want to. Today's my stand is that, we don't know anything. When the answers really come, we'll take the answers. But right now, take whatever precautions you can take. So precautionary principle, whatever other people say is working. But we are doing minimally invasive even today with proper precautions. We are doing, all our work is still going on. We are operating every day. We are operating every day. We are doing minimally invasive.
I agree with that, sir, because cancer cannot wait.
Yes.
But probably the benign thyroidectomies, the hemithyroidectomies, all these can definitely wait. And even a very early stage thyroid cancer can probably wait a couple of months. I mean,
Yes.
not wait indefinitely, but these are the patients which, though cancers, we can still counsel them and ask them to wait. And
Many of the thyroid patients are waiting actually. Even the ones who diagnosed in March, I don't know, they're still preferring to wait. I don't know till when they'll wait.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to make one query from my side. And why did you select the bilateral axillary breast technique or the rabbit technique over the lateral neck approach? And many surgeons prefer the lateral neck approach in the beginning of the career. And what is the advantage over the transoral approach? How do you compare the rabbit technique with the other two approaches, basically?
See, when we are doing trans-axillary by Baba technique or Rabbit, I'll first cover the Baba technique. Baba technique, again, we are all used to seeing the thyroid from, from the caudal side, caudolateral. So we are trained like that. Our anatomy description is like that. So there is no learning of an entire new anatomical concept when we do either of these techniques. Your vision is same. In fact, when you do rabbit, it is the exact same thing what you do in open surgery. There is no change in concept or appearance. Nothing changes. Your vision is same. Anybody who's trained in open surgery can do rabbit. But when you are doing lateral approach or transoral approach, you have to learn an entirely new concept altogether. Anatomy is inverted. You have to look for something like anything like recurrent laryngeal nerve and all. You have to relearn the anatomy, where it is passing, how it is going, and when you're doing endoscopic, you're doing 2D. So to relearn that and do it, I think it is too much of an effort, which is not necessary, because it doesn't really make a difference whether you go from here or there. When we see the entire series of cases which we have done, I don't feel we don't have any problems related to this approach at all. Of course, if the person is very comfortable, it's their comfort. We can't really say this is the only way to go, but it's a personal comfort. Again, remember, in any of this trans or the facelift approach, the wound size is quite big. It's not a small wound, and initially it will be very difficult for you to do total thyroidectomy from this unilateral approach, because it is hanging over. You have to work on the opposite side, which is really impossible to do. So very few people really will be able to master it. But when it comes to so they'll have to use bilateral incisions, and it's huge incision. Your your incision size is bigger than conventional open surgery incision. It's just that it is not in front of the neck. That's all. So with rabbit, the incision side, if you see the wound after healing, you can barely see. There are only nipple wounds are invisible. Not nipple, sorry, areola wounds are invisible. Only the axillary wounds may be visible in some people, but there is nothing else left of the surgery. In fact, most of the patients, when they see, I'm very happy to look at their neck. There's nothing black also.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
of course. That would be the ideal surgery for all these young women, I mean, who are prone to thyroid cancer
Yeah.
or these benign thyroid nodules. Another thing, I mean, it's an extension of one of the questions asked in the panel. Is it, you have shown a video of central compartment neck dissection and heavily loaded neck, that was central compartment. But what about your experience with the lateral compartment neck dissection with the endoscopic or the robotic approach?
See, when it is lateral, we prefer the robotic only. Because when we're doing bilateral and all, I have done extensive neck dissections in many patients with robotic. Bilateral neck dissection, central neck thyroidectomy with bilateral neck with bilateral central compartment. So at least about 10 cases we have done. Unilateral we have done another few. So in fact, it is very useful. We do it. It takes some time because you need to. It takes time to really do the dissection, but even open surgeries take time because when we are doing bilateral neck canal, it's not a simple procedure. Same thing, same precision, same quality of work. So, but you will not see a single scar in the neck, and the same 4 wounds or 5 wounds which we use, it's the same wounds which are used for that as well. So the dissection is also same wound, same thing, just the rabbit approach what we use.
Okay, some more questions here.
Okay.
So does it have a role in lymph node identification? No.
Lymph node identification in thyroid, no, because
sentinel node, I guess that's what they're intending to ask. Sentinel node, I think there's no role of
in thyroid
fluorescence in thyroid. Yeah, unlike in other breast cancers or penile cancers where we're doing sentinel node biopsies, I think there's no sentinel node technique described for thyroid cancer as such with this.
Yes.
And how costly is the fluorescence dye procedure? That's already answered, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, dye is extremely cheap, about 500 rupees. I think Orogreen, which is available, I think is about 500 rupees also. So it's compared to this one radioisotope and all, which is used for sentinel, it's really cheap. Anyway, for thyroid, there's nothing else to use. This is the only thing, but extremely cheap. It doesn't really. In fact, one vial, if you have multiple cases in the day, you can use for multiple patients also. So
of course.
it gets divided.
Yes, yes. Yeah, if you have some sentinel node biopsies or some multiple thyroid cases in a day, I think it gets even cheaper. Yeah. So the only cost is the equipment cost. And yeah, so just extending on that, just an observation I just wanted to make based on the machines or the instrumentation that is available. So when the attendees need to realize that there is an open technique and there is the endoscopic technique. So with the open techniques, Stryker has a SPY-5 cam. Correct. So the SPY-5 cam can be used with the open technique. I mean, it may not be only for the endoscopic procedures, and with the SPY-5, there is an additional mode. I mean, you might have seen the indocyanine green mode, which is black and white mode. You can't really operate on that. You can just identify the parathyroid gland based on its vascularity, but you can't really operate on that mode. You also have the green overlay mode, which you see it's available on the laparoscopic cart also. And with the SPY-5, there is the additional CSF mode, that is the color segmentation fraction mode, which shows it even more beautifully. You have to see it to actually appreciate. But
this is displayed. You can show this is the image you are talking about. Is this there?
It's not there in this, sir. This is the laparoscopic picture, I guess.
Yeah.
So this is the laparoscopic image. So in the laparoscopic image, you have the black and white ICG mode, which is in the second, which is B, which is seen in the pic B. The third mode is the overlay mode, where you can operate while looking at the video like this. So you can see the parathyroid gland clearly separate from the rest of the thyroid tissue. So you can use it both in the open technique and also the endoscopic techniques. And with the endoscopic technique, there is, a better visualization as such because of the magnification which you already highlighted.
See, both open as well as pinpoint. This both have similar mode settings. Actually, all the modes are there. You can use all the modes in all the settings. This is a similar technology.
Okay. The spy. The Striker camera, the 1588 and the 1688, both of them are enabled with the fluorescence technology. So there is nothing additional that you have to invest. If your hospital has a Striker machine, the laparoscopic machine, I think you just have to buy an ICG vial and start operating. I mean, to do this, to identify the parathyroids. Even this technology is available even in Karl stores. These are the only two companies I have any experience with. But with the Karl store machine, the visualization is not that good. That's just an observation from my side. I don't know about your experience, sir. Do you have any experience with the stores machine?
I have used Olympus. I have used stores. I have not. I've used, yeah. I have used stores also. Trialed it before. See, everybody has got now, because even Maxer, everybody has got. But in combination with I think 4K only Striker has as of now. Rest of them have in combination with the full, their HD systems. So nobody else has 4K combined with this. So that is the situation as of now. But see, all of them have positives and negatives. So we really can't say which is. You have to trial it out and see which suits your requirement, rather than going by. But my experience with this has been good. We have been using it extensively for all our central lymph node dissections, as well as all other angiographies. Quite often we have used it, even for flaps, head and neck flaps. When we do, we have been using this same one to see the vascularity. So we have used it. In fact, it's a very good thing. The ICG dye based angiography and this thing. ICG is so versatile. Everywhere you can use it. It's a very good. Fluorescence is really something which is changing the way we do the things.
So any complications using this technique? I think they are only related to the ICG dye injection. So it has very high, rare risk of anaphylaxis. So that is the only complication I think we can see with this technique. So another question is, can you remove all sizes of thyroid by this method? Where can you remove very big cancers also? I mean, that's a subjective.
It is your.
When do you put a cutoff? Yeah.
Sorry.
What size do you take as a cutoff? I mean, will you operate on a 4 centimeter? Will you operate on a 7 centimeter? It's just a subjective.
It is very subjective. I do see. When I started doing my cases, I was very careful with selections. I used to only take below 4 centimeters. Now I'm taking any size, except where there is no space to operate. That is the only criteria. If there's no space, then the thyroid is sitting like in front of the face like this, then it's of course not a case for it. But otherwise, fairly large tumors, even up to 7 centimeters, 8 centimeters, it's not a problem at all.
I think we have covered almost all the questions. I think that was a great talk. Anything from the Striker team? I mean, shall we conclude, or any observations you want to make? Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Karthik and Dr. Sandeep, it was really a great session. So we from Striker team would like to extend a very big thank you to both of you for giving your time, and Dr. Sandeep Nayak for giving his extra time for preparing a very good presentation for us all. the way you explain the importance of parathyroid gland and the complications like permanent hypocalcemia and the seriousness with it, it's really very commendable. And not only that, you started from the basic anatomy and need of better instruments to study it, and you showed your techniques in rabbit procedure, and also you showed us the Baba procedure, and you gave us a very good introduction in fluorescence imaging as well. How it is very helpful to give real time angiography results and to assess the vascularity as well. And I think the audience also felt that autofluorescence is a good thing to explore in future. Thank you so much, Dr. Karthik, for taking all the questions of the attendees here. Thank you so much to both of you. And also, I would like to extend my thanks to all the participants for giving your an hour and 7 minutes to us. It really meant a lot from Striker. Thank you. I hope the session was really useful to you all and you learned new things. Thank you.
Thank you.